Good evening, Erev Tov, and a very warm welcome to all our panelists and to the many hundreds who are joining us literally from the four corners of the earth. We are thrilled to have you all with us for what we know will not only be an interesting and stimulating discussion, but one that I'm sure will ultimately bear fruit by helping many from within our own communities. On behalf of the Paperweight Trust, we are excited to be hosting and organizing this inaugural event of the Ze'ev and Paula Raka Social Initiative Project. The Raka family are synonymous in London and beyond with supporting and working for a wide range of worthy causes. We are so grateful for your support and your interest in our work. I know that we are joined this evening by Zina, Mindy, and Dina, and I know it is just a few days after your father's yahrzeit, and we hope that the positive discussion and outcomes of this evening's event will be a source of nachas and inspiration for all your families and for their dear memories. Across our worldwide communities, we are blessed, truly blessed, to have a proliferation of charities, organizations, gemachs, and much more to provide support and help for every possible need in every circumstance. And the vast sums of money that are raised and donated to enable us to continue our work are second only to the acts of chesed. And yet, we all continually ask ourselves, could we do more? Could we do better? Could we do it different? And what is it like elsewhere? At Paperweight, we are honored and humbled to be at the forefront of facing some of the major issues affecting our communities in these times. Together, I'm confident that we can help each other rise to the challenges. It is our wish that the conversation today will be a beginning, a coming together, a broadening of our outlook, a sharing of experience and knowledge, a source of mutual support, and also perhaps a moment or two to provide some reflection. Before I hand over, my huge thanks and sincere appreciation to all our panel members. 9 p.m. in Israel and 2 p.m. on a hot Sunday afternoon in New York are not ideal times, but we look forward to hearing from you all, and thank you for so readily agreeing to join us. My thanks also to our team at Hope for all your hard work and technical know-how. Where would we be without you? And finally, my deep thanks and appreciation to my good friend, our chair, Lord Jonathan Kestenbaum. Thank you for being part of this unique event, and I know that you would lead the conversation with your usual incisive, erudite, and charming manner. Thank you all, and I will now pass over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Benji. Good friend and very long-standing friend. So really pleased to be with you. And just echoing two of your opening remarks, first of all, also my appreciation to the Raka family for not only throwing your weight behind this event and the organization, but for everything that you do. And secondly, of course, in that spirit, to all the volunteers that sit both behind and in front of all the organizations, we're going to look this evening at the ties that bind all these organizations. And I'm pretty sure that one of the themes that will come out will be the strength of volunteerism that sits behind what all of you do. So my opening remarks. As Benji said, it's very much a global panel from Manchester to Jerusalem, from London to the United States to South Africa, very much a global panel. And we really wanted to do just what I said a moment ago, which is to draw out the ties which bind us across these continents and across these cities at what feels to be a particularly demanding time. And what we're aiming to do is to find out the ways in which different communities around the world are providing support to peoples, to families, to individuals, to wider organizations at times of immense crisis. And I think what you'll probably hear are ways in which we're responding to individuals and families' economic crisis, ways in which we're responding to community-wide crisis. And in that way, hopefully the plan, as Benji indicated, is to learn from each other at a time when everybody feels to be under a huge amount of strain. I think at this point, moderators like me use that word housekeeping. So why should I be any different? Just a word of context here, how we're going to go about it. So I think we've got just about an hour, maybe a touch more together. We've got a big and global panel. So my first comment is addressed to you, the panelists, which is do try and keep your remarks succinct and tight. And that way we'll be able to get a lot more out of the conversation and as much interaction, hopefully, as we possibly can. And to those watching, if you do want to pitch in, then do please either make a general comment on the chat for all concerned, or if you want to direct a question to the panelists or any given individual, you'll see one of the icons at the bottom of the toolbar shows Q&A. So please put that in the Q&A. And Lionel, keeping a beady eye on us, if I or we get anything wrong, just dive in and get us back on track. So that will be the format. So what I'm going to do is, I think I may ask, if you don't mind, each of the panelists just to say something about themselves, the organization from which they come, and then here's the exam question for each of you. I mentioned at the outset that these seems to be times of unprecedented crisis. What I'd love you to do in your opening remark or two is to say something about the particular demands that seem to be made on you at the moment, because I just sense that in drawing out the particular demands, that's where we're going to find things in common, and that's where we're going to be able to learn from each other. So shall I sort of give you your running order so you're ready and prepared? So we'll ask Saul from South Africa, Saul Thompson, the CEO from the Chevra Group, to kick off. Chaya, and then you, the CEO of Agudas Yisrael, and thereafter I will identify the next person up. So you get your starting orders two in advance. So Saul, couple of minutes from you, and then Chaya, I'm going to hand over to you, and then I'll ask other members of the panel individually, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much, and what an honor it is to participate with such an auspicious group, and thank you for thinking about South Africa. We might be far away, but we certainly feel like we're an important part of the Jewish world, and our community is a fascinating community on the tip of Africa. I think just perhaps some context to understand our organization, which ironically is called the Chevra Kadisha, and was started as a burial society in 1888. But today, 95% of the work that we do is centered around the living, providing cradle to grave financial and emotional support to our Jewish community in Johannesburg. I also want to say at the outset that there's a vibrant Jewish community in Cape Town and other smaller towns, cities around Johannesburg. And so I'm just reflecting on predominantly what happens in Johannesburg, which is still the majority of Jews in South Africa, but really just one part of the picture. And I think just to share a little bit on the South African context, we sit in a very challenging environment. And since inception, I believe our community has had to solve and innovate to exist as a Jewish community on the tip of Africa. Largely, our organization replaces government services. State support is insufficient, often inefficient, and very often ineffective. And so looking after a Jewish community at the moment, I would say in South Africa, in the region of 50,000 Jews, is a large challenge. The community is definitely an aging community. Many of the children have left and have immigrated to, I believe, many of the cities where my fellow panelists are speaking from, and I'm pretty sure that they are doing wonderful work in those communities as well. South Africa has a life expectancy of 65. an unemployment rate of nearly 50%. We provide the main benefits from state are an old age pension or disability grant, which would average at about £100 a month. And essentially, there are very few other government services to support our community. So really, in order to survive, our organization has evolved into a really cradle to grave welfare and emotional support service organization, predominantly looking after elderly people who really have nowhere else to turn. The organization reaches probably 15 to 20% of Johannesburg Jewry, and it really replaces most of government services and is a safety net to the Jews that are remaining in South Africa. We operate at a budget of £16 million per annum. And we are there to ensure that those that need residential services in aged homes, in children's homes, homes for those with intellectual and physical disability are catered for. And of course, financial support to indigent members of our community who need assistance in all forms of monthly support, covering the spectrum of services, be it accommodation, food, healthcare, education. There is one organization largely in Johannesburg that is there to make sure the indigent are looked after. And then of course, just to end off that we are still the Burial Society and still ensure that we look after this community when that time approaches.
So the picture emerging is it's an all-encompassing set of provision. Chaya, by contrast, tell us a bit about yourself and the very distinctive set of services that you offer.
So, Agudis, you introduced me as the leader of Agudis Yisrael. I actually run Agudis Yisrael Housing Association. So about 40 years ago, Agudis Yisrael of Great Britain, which is a broad umbrella organisation, saw the need to specifically support the community's housing needs and set up a housing office. Our mission, Agudis Yisrael Housing Association's mission, is to provide quality homes for people in housing need. Our focus is specifically on the Orthodox Jewish community, which is again Agudis Yisrael's brief, and we have around over 900 homes across different communities in England. We have general housing for families, usually for families in housing need, and we also have specialist homes. So akin to Saul, what you described, housing with care for older people, for people with various needs, mental health needs, people with learning disabilities. We have a whole range of different types of housing. Your Kestenbaum, you started by talking about just what a difficult time we live in. And you used the word crisis. And I think that's right. We are in a time of housing crisis. Housing crisis affects people from all communities in England for sure, and in the other countries where panelists are from. But for Jewish communities that rely on community and need to live in specific areas, that housing crisis is amplified and it's more acute. So we are facing a really difficult situation where poor housing, severe overcrowding, overpriced housing is a blight on the lives of thousands of families in our community. So the challenge that lies ahead of us is really massive. I only hold this role for a year, for almost a year, so since September 21. And prior to that, for 25 years, I led the Interlink Foundation, which is the national network of Orthodox Jewish community organisations in England. So, and that network is a very wide, as Saul said, the cradle to grave group of services, autonomous and individual. What we did and continue to do at Interlink is provide that central voice and that central support system that binds them all together. So while at Agudisi Thrall, we are very tightly focused on housing needs and associated needs, that word crisis is being experienced across the whole network of community organisations.
Thank you very much, Kaya. Thank you. And let me just say that I will ask you, Moshe Shapira, to speak next in line with what you've heard already. Just a word on you and, of course, the organisation that you lead, the CEO Yedidut Toronto Foundation, and you're based in Yerushalayim. And then once you've said some opening remarks, Bela, I will turn to you to do the same. So keep your remarks tight, just opening comments. And remember, the exam question is, what seems to be the biggest set of demands on you right now in a way in which you might not have anticipated a year, 2, 3, or 5 ago? So Moshe, over to you, please.
Okay, good evening. Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. Yedidut Toronto is a nonprofit incubator established in 2008 by the Friedberg Foundation of Toronto, hence its name. We create effective solutions to systemic flaws in Israeli society, as well as in North America and South America. We develop and test these new intervention models for increasing quality of life in undeserved communities. And we partner with government agencies, foundations, and other NGOs to implement those interventions widely and effect long-lasting change. Our fields of interest are employment and education, children and teens at risk, safeguarding, emotional well-being. I just would like to also say that we are partially funded by the Aberdeen Foundation of the UK, and we're very grateful for that. In terms of what we are seeing today as the needs that are most extreme, that are becoming very loud, I would say that unmet mental health needs are a major issue. Youth at risk, specifically sexual abuse. I have a lot to say, so I'm trying to keep it very short. Growing gaps between sectors in Israeli society. At times, it seems like we are living in 2 different countries, with the center being very prosperous and the peripheries less so. And we see the results of that, the repercussions of that disparity. And we are now starting to see high inflation, as I'm sure others here are as well, and possibly the beginning of a recession, which is an alarm bell for us. And we're starting to see what impact we could have among the people who are already being impacted, are already being affected by that.
Thank you very much. Clear and succinct. Bela, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. In a very succinct paragraph, I would describe Paperweight as being the Jewish community's advice and resource center, offering free, immediate, practical guidance across a range of legal and financial, welfare and administrative matters. Our aim is to help those who've arrived at a vulnerable point in their life, and we want to give them time, expertise, care and personal attention so that they can regain control and continue with confidence. That is in a nutshell what we do with active crisis management teams who are on alert every day in order to be able to help the 4 or 5 new clients that we take on every single day. I think if I was to pinpoint what is taking the most of our time currently, I would say it's families floundering. We are entering a perfect storm of debt, of uncertainty, which is giving rise to something that Moshe just said, severe mental health. And we find also in the UK that since COVID, local authorities, which were there for social welfare aspect of people's lives, closed down and never really reopened. We have fractured families who are just holding it together, and they're even more vulnerable when debt issues are so prevalent. And when that family breaks down, organizations such as ours pick up the pieces, and the consequent cost to the community is something that we and others really our aim is to try to avoid. When we see the many consequences of finance being scarce, and as I mentioned before, local authorities closing down means that people don't have the connection, they don't have anybody to phone, patients cannot be discharged from hospitals, there's no social packages, and people who seek answers to social welfare questions are just sent on wild goose chases and become distressed at the lack of communication and the sheer time delay that these responses, in delaying getting these responses, which is where Paperweight come in order to help alleviate all of this, in order to be able to shorten the time span and be able to help where we can. And I think that's my nutshell, really.
That's perfect. Thank you very much, Bela. Rabbi Bender, I'll come to you in a moment. And then Mark, if you wouldn't mind concluding this opening session, that would be really helpful. And then I'll try and bring some of those themes together and bring you all in. Rabbi Baruch Bender is the president and founder of the renowned Achiezer. I think we found you in New York this afternoon. And I would love you just to make some opening remarks. And if everybody else listening could go on to mute, that would be great. So, Rabbi Bender, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope you hear me. I know I logged in a bit late due to a funeral, and it's an honor to be here. I'll try to be brief in my introductory words, and I just do need to give a recognition, a shout out to Benjamin, who reached out to me a number of years ago when they were seeking to begin such a resource out by you guys, and it's really gratifying to see how beautiful a resource you guys have put together there. So you and Bela and everybody there behind it, it's something very special. It's hard to put this into a nutshell, but I will, for the sake of the flow. You know, Achiezer is and has become the idea was really that nobody should be alone during a time of crisis. That's the best way to describe it. 2 p.m., 2 a.m., Shabbos, on a Sunday, on a weekend, that when somebody, falls onto a crisis, falls onto a moment, whether it's a small crisis, a large crisis, a sudden crisis, and they don't know where to turn, there's a lifeline, there's a place to reach out to, and that's how Achiezer was born. I've heard some other people mention in the moment, where were they then and now? It's already close to more than 13 years since we began. We started out by giving some easy medical referrals locally for people who are trying to navigate, trying to find the right physician who accepted their insurance. And to make a very long story short, for now, you fast forward these 13 years later, and you walk into the Achiezer office, and it's something that I'm here representing, but it's not about me. I'm very proud of it. You'd think it's like a large business office where you'll see dozens of people sitting there, phones ringing, and on one phone is somebody suffering with a medical condition, and the other phone is somebody suffering with a mental health situation in the family, a family in crisis, somebody who doesn't have health insurance, or, as I see is a very common theme of the day, somebody struggling to put basics on their table. So in closing of this opening piece, like I promised, I think very similar, and I think this is a conversation globally that needs to continue, because to compare these kind of notes, if you ask me, is invaluable. And what I'm seeing just in the last 7 or 8 minutes, each person getting on and wrapping up their pressing issues, and I think you've all heard what you heard, but certainly I'll close by saying that, even if it's somebody calling for a cardiologist or somebody struggling with a teenage daughter who has severe mental health issues, and so on and so forth, across the gamut, at the root of, I would say, statistically, I would venture to say more than 80% of our crises cases that come in, and they're very wide. Yes, we're Far Rockaway 5 towns based, but we take calls from, at this point, around the country and certainly beyond, because if people know that we've developed crisis solutions, if you will. But to stay on track, at the root of so many of these issues is the inability to make their financial means. So if you don't have the right health insurance, you can't get to the right doctor. If you don't have insurance, period, or extra money, you can't afford that private therapist. And if you don't have, the proper amount of money coming into your household, then how could you afford, with today's rising prices and inflation, you can't afford that. So I would say that that is having a tremendous effect. And I've only seen that get worse. And like Bela said, since COVID, many of the social services in the country by us, they're still on the, I hate to talk such an easy word, in that excuse mode where, oh, that department is closed, due to COVID. And these people are not suffering less because 2 years later, some departments, more than 2 years, seem to have disappeared. So it's just leading to many families struggling like I've never seen. And I've been doing this for a long time. So that's a nutshell. I hope a little more than a nutshell in my opening remarks. And thanks again for having me.
Really helpful. Thank you, Rabbi. And Mark Cunningham in Manchester, just conclude this opening section with a word about the Fed, and in particular, as I said earlier, the particular demands that are being made on you now.
Good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation to join the panel. Just to clear up any confusion for those people that are joining us from the US, the Fed actually stands for the Federation of Jewish Services. We're one of the oldest welfare organisations in Manchester, established in 1867. I've been extremely privileged to work for the organisation since 1996. We're the largest welfare organisation in Manchester, and we provide quite a range of services, from social work to children's services, mental health services, volunteer support, residential and nursing care, information advice, and respite. So we have quite a range of support that we deliver to people across Greater Manchester, and increasingly further out than that. We estimate that we support in one way, shape or form, 1 in 7 Jewish homes in Greater Manchester. Our biggest set of demands at the moment, certainly the rise in demand for community-based services, particularly social work and volunteering support. I think that echoes the retreat by statutory services in terms of their preventative work and the slow response that we're unfortunately seeing from some statutory sector providers. I'm also the chair of the National Association of Jewish Homes, again, which is a great privilege. So I'm very au fait with the challenges affecting the residential and nursing sector. There's been quite a lot in the news recently about some of the challenges that are being faced there. And alongside that, the workforce issue, which I think probably affects everybody in terms of recruitment, retention, and the increasing skill set that we all need to deliver services. Demand for mental health support, as I echo what other panelists have said, that's certainly increased. Housing issues and issues around debt, poverty, and increasingly fuel poverty have certainly risen to the surface, in many cases unexpectedly, in terms of the level of demand. I hope that is a fairly succinct.
Yeah, it's great, Mark. Thank you very much. Fantastic. And
appraisal.
No, it's perfect. Thank you very much. And I wonder, listening to you all, I think it was Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities who suggested that famous line, "It was the best of times and it was the worst of times." And listening to you, it does project a picture of two communities. The community which is often written about and stereotyped, if you like, which is a community at ease and in some respect at privilege. But you really, listening to you, you don't have to look too far to realize that it's the worst of times too. And it isn't just that privileged community that the stereotype would have us believe, but yours are organizations which are providing a range of provision to those most in need, to those most vulnerable, and often those who have little ability to call on that help. And let me ask you to address that last point. Rabbi Bender, I'm going to start with you, because you mentioned in passing, like many of you, you've been at it for a long time, and that is the stigma associated in the minds of some with reaching out for that help. I wonder if you've seen that change over the years for the better. In other words, more of a willingness to seek help. And if not, how do your organizations go about reaching those who are most in need? Rabbi Bender, can we start with you?
Sure. So I think first, to answer you flat out, I think we're definitely in a better place than we were. Nothing to talk about. And I can speak from direct experience. in our unique situation, I can't say this is, we'll have uniformity across each organization. We benefit very much. I'm always nervous when we do a lot because the jack of all trades is the master of none. But we've departmentalized. But because Achiezer is so varied, and because you could be knocking on that door to give a donation, we hope it's always to give a donation. But if you could be coming to discuss a doctor, you could be coming to volunteer, you could be coming for a mental health matter, you could be coming for health insurance. So that helps us a lot, because just automatically from the get-go, that stigma, it's not like if I'm going into Achiezer, if I'm calling Achiezer, it must be because who knows what is happening. So automatically, because of that umbrella approach, I think it takes off a little bit of pressure. I think what's interesting is that the more we, again, it's easy to say it, normalize the fact that I always tell people, someone says to me yesterday in shul, you didn't know about this webinar, right? Because I think I'm going to sit down with my wife and discuss this with the therapist, something like that. And I said, you should try it. It's in style, something like that, And his point was like, well, doesn't everybody do it? So what's the big deal? I think that anybody who's trying to raise a family in 2022 with the pressures, half of which we didn't even get to, that are existing around us, they all understand that we all need a little bit of help. I think, and I'll change your question, and with this I'll end, what we're facing, and I don't know if others are, I want to stay on point, is that I think specifically with mental health, because of the work of many of these organizations on this Zoom, I think we've come very far, that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to not be okay. Everything's okay until it's not okay. I think that a beautiful part of what we're talking about is that there's a lot of help. And it's like you said about the stereotyping, there's so much chesed, there is so much kindness going on. But what I'm finding now, and it goes back to the financial pressure, and I'll give that one example, this I'll end, is that we have people who say, sure, we'll get the mental health intervention, we'll get the crisis intervention. The problem is, and again, maybe for a whole nother Zoom, not today, is that we have specifically many people who are reaching out for help, who want to go see a professional. In that specific example, perhaps rehab. Someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Moshe, about sexual abuse, right? The issue is with many of these people is that traditional health insurance, certainly in the US, is not going to cover 97, 98% of those facilities, those private therapists and clinics. So the issue we have now is that we've come a long way in 13 years fighting the stigma, and now we're having a problem with access. And it's a problem that's not been solved yet, but that's almost like a new emerging crisis where, hey, we're here to get the help, but we're not exactly sure how to get it because most people just don't have the means to dig in to pay for what's needed.
So let me ask you, Bela, is that your experience as well at Paperweight, that whereas once people might have felt, gosh, I don't think I can cope, but I'm too embarrassed to ask for help. Are you sensing that some of that embarrassment, thankfully, is falling away?
I think desperation will drive people to make contact. I think that's for sure. I think we still have a sense in England, probably maybe still unlike America, where any talk of finance and certainly of debt is what we call the last taboo. I think it's a wonderful thing that nowadays people have sort of almost been given permission, if you like, to have a conversation about their mental health, about cancer, and about abuse, which are terrible and shocking subjects in and of themselves. But thankfully, due to the wonderful PR that these subjects have been given, people will talk about those things more freely and will seek help for them more freely. And at Paperweight, we definitely see that because we give practical help for any of those topics. And of course, we give a huge amount of practical help for finance. But the problem that we're finding is that people will come to us only when they're absolutely desperate, when somebody comes knocking on the door because they're owing the money, and when the debt has become so acute that they're piling their credit cards and their utilities and everything is just coming crashing down over their shoulders. So we need in the UK to have more confidence about asking for help for financially related matters before the crisis hits, because obviously it's so much easier to help and before something becomes really an acute phase. But
could I pick up a question that was put to us by somebody in the audience who's typed a question on the Q&A, and I think it's a very pertinent one. And this person in the audience is picking up on this theme about being able to reach out. And I think they are quite right to identify areas of mental health and domestic abuse over which there might still be some degree of stigma, which prevents people from wanting to reach out, let alone acknowledge their difficulty. So the question was, how do you help people reach out? I think Rabbi Bender gave us a start, but Saul, just some very practical thoughts, really practical, of experiences you've had where you've managed to break through, if you like, some resistance that those who are experiencing in terms of being willing to acknowledge and reach out. Let me ask you first, Saul.
Thank you. I think the challenge, has compounded in the last few years, particularly, with those who are, we rely, heavily on families. Most of the families living overseas, concerned about relatives. They haven't traveled, they haven't seen their relatives. And so we really need to avail ourselves to those families. So if you are concerned, and if there's something happening that perhaps you're not aware of, you can't reach somebody, let us know. Let us go into your homes and see what's happening. So we've picked this up, particularly now towards the tail end of COVID, that we need to actually be in people's homes, reaching out, knocking on the door, trying to get access, although it's difficult, and building trust. And I do believe availing oneself and making oneself present in people's lives does increase the openness to sharing. That's certainly been our experience, particularly where vulnerable families, where vulnerable people haven't had that family contact. It's about creating that presence and awareness.
Moshe Shapira, to you, please, that practical ways in which, in answering one of our audience members' questions, of breaking through that resistance, that embarrassment. Could you give us an experience or two that you've had, a successful one, in breaking that down?
Yes, certainly. I think in our experience, there's been.
We've just, Moshe, you've gone on to mute inadvertently. There you go.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that in the past decade, we have seen an improvement in the ultra-Orthodox Haredi communities' willingness to benefit from mental health care. There used to be a very heavy stigma, and we see today that there's been a breakthrough. And also to work with us on safeguarding projects. And I think that the key to the breakthrough is adapting the programs to the cultural sensitivities of each community, and not assuming that one type of program suits everyone. This kind of ties in with another question that was in the prompts about the difference between the state's ability to provide services as opposed to Jewish philanthropy or Jewish charity. And I think that that's one of the differences, is that I think we're able to provide each community with the services in a way that does not offend, first of all, but also reaches out in a way that speaks to their background and to their belief system and to their experiences.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting listening to all those who responded to that question, was how much emphasis you put on being proactive. In the old days, we would say not sitting in the office and waiting for the phone to ring. Saul called it being present. You, Moshe Shapira, spoke about reaching out. Rabbi Bender almost went as far as to say, look, this is now in the price, so to speak. It's what people are expecting. So I think it's a very strong theme in terms of one of the things we're aiming to learn this evening, which is sharing ideas, which is what is incumbent on all these organizations, and what they show so well is that they're not reactive. They're very, very proactive, and that's one of the ways of doing it. I wanted to pick up on another of the themes, and in this instance, I'm going to call on you, Chaya, and on you, Mark. So get ready. and I'll tell you what it is. A couple of you spoke about the fact that longevity and an increasing age span is starting to bring distinctive challenges. And I would imagine in no more acute an area than housing. And I guess many people watching this webinar who have aged parents or aged grandparents are getting to grips with the great blessing that aged parents and grandparents brings, but equally the distinctive challenges. And I wondered if I can start with you, Mark. This isn't just about a community which is getting older. This is about a community which is living much, much longer, but equally with very unique health challenges, housing challenges. And I wonder if you're experiencing that.
I think it's a really good point to acknowledge. I know locally, I've recently seen some data that suggests Bury, which is a part of Greater Manchester, the number of people aged 80 to 84 will increase by about 39% by 2030. And you can take that through to people aged 90 plus. That age group will increase by 31%. And at the same time, we're likely to see a 22% increase in people living with dementia. So we have to begin to shape our services to meet those changing demographics, that changing demand. It's like you say, it's a fantastic thing that we're all living longer, but we have to acknowledge that there are new and unique demands that come with that. I think housing is a key issue, that housing has to be designed to accommodate people with longer term disabilities through to much later in life. Currently, there isn't a sufficient supply of that, and at the same time, we're seeing local authority and government policy change towards residential and nursing care. There's a distinct move towards reducing reliance upon that. So as that service reduces and the people likely to need it are going to increase, there's going to be a real dilemma for us as a community. And I'm sure that's something that Chaya recognises in terms of the services that she provides.
That's your cue, Chaya. Come off mute and tell us if you recognise that.
Completely, absolutely. So, and just a comment, this is not just about older people. There are more people nowadays who are living with disabilities. Children survive more with disabilities. They grow into adulthood with disabilities, and we need to increase. We need to be ready there to increase our supply and our provision. We need to be prepared to increase housing-based care, because for many people that is going to be the answer. They are going to need to move out of their homes into either sheltered homes where they can still live independently, but in a supported setting. For others, it's going to be about residential or nursing care. But we also have to gear up the home-based care that we provide to people. And in our case, again, unlike Mark and unlike Thor, we don't provide everything. But what we absolutely do is we talk to the other organisations who do those services, so that we are all gearing up together. I guess that a massive challenge in all of this is it's all very well to say grow your services, but what the nation is able and prepared to pay for older people's care doesn't actually match up to what we insist as the minimum plus level. So in that sense, you know, Saul, in South Africa, that might be much more acute. The difference between what we as a community insist on providing and what the state provides is vast. Actually, in this country, it's also growing. And the trick for us communally, I think, is to make sure that absolutely advise, support, provide for people the maximum, ensure that they access via us what they are entitled to from the state, but then mobilise as a community via volunteers, via philanthropic funds to make sure that we can give them what we think our elders should be, all our vulnerable people should be getting during those years after they've given, and it's time for them to be looked after by us.
Yeah, and I think in answer to, I can answer in terms of one of the questions that has come through. I think, Chaya, that your organization addresses the unique needs of your community, your constituencies, and you provide support and advice and expertise to those outside of the immediate community. And in that sense, it's a very strong collaborative effort, and we'll come to the point on collaboration in a minute. A point which was raised on the Q&As, and for those who are flooding it, thank you. And I will, if you don't mind, I think I might just protect your anonymity, so won't reference to individual names. There's a really interesting point to all of you, which you will recognize, from somebody who has said that they're involved in running a small welfare fund, a gemach, if you like, in the shul, and very struck by the fact that requests are coming in now in a way that would never have come before from families that nobody knew were experiencing financial distress. And looking at the nods across the panel, I think that's probably also a theme as well, which is there are all sorts of hidden needs in there. And that goes back to something which is jumping out from this panel all the time, which is the importance of being proactive. Let me ask you, Saul, that there's one question which has come through from the audience, which is about collaboration. And I guess that's one of the hallmarks of this panel, isn't it? Working collaboratively. But you, of course, as you said in your introduction, Saul, you sit atop an organization which has, how did you put it, the cradle to grave provision. And I wonder if you could say something about the strengths of thinking collaboratively and in as integrated a fashion as possible. Would you say something about that? And let's see if we can draw out some common lessons on working collaboratively.
Certainly, I think that, you know, the South African Jewish community is quite renowned in its unity, and the organizations that exist work very, very well together and support one another, and often share the challenges. So, you know, we're merely one piece of that puzzle, particularly the welfare piece, but there's vast amounts of services in the education and the medical sphere that need to be privatized. But certainly within our own organization, until approximately 20 years ago, we were pretty much just a burial society. And it was the changing demographics in South Africa that forced all these multiple organizations to come underneath a single umbrella. And what we've seen as a result is this tremendous ability to get a single view of the beneficiary. So we can understand, you know, if somebody's parents need assistance, if their children need assistance, if there's a mental health issue within the family, we have 26 social workers who are looking at every aspect of their lives. And we're blessed, I guess, to have the full array of services to address those needs. So I guess this, you know, business concept of a single view of a customer has really become a key enabler for all the work we do collaboratively. And of course, with scarce resources, it's also enabled tremendous efficiencies and prevention of duplication of services between the different aged homes or the different services that we provide.
Rabbi Bender, do you recognize that your ability at Achiezer to call upon varying sources of expertise to build as rich a network as possible so you can provide the best solutions for the people that are coming to you?
So there is absolutely no question that one of our strengths, and I think what directly leads to impact in the lives of many people that call us, is the collaboration, not just speaking the talk and having the ceremonial conversations and coffees and just, you know, and gatherings at times, Because at the end of the day, no, I don't think even Achiezer, right, who I described has so many servers under one roof, nobody can fix everything. And I think to strengthen your question, or whoever asked it, about 3 years ago, we actually made the decision that we dedicated a full-time desk, a full-time employee in the office, specifically to resource guidance. Now you may ask, what does that mean? You are the resource. People are calling you for help. But we actually have somebody whose job, full-time, is to be aware of every single organization, every single small gemach, large gemach, every therapist, whatever's out there, so that yes, there are times when somebody calls Achiezer, we may not have the service for them to fix it, but our job is not to fix every problem, and we all need to recognize that. But it is our job to be able to tell that person, hey, we got you. We don't have that service here, and not just a phone number. My colleague so-and-so who works over there, give her a call, give him a call, and they're going to tell you. And it works both ways. By way of example, we have other organizations in the community that focus exclusively with teens at risk. So if we get a phone call like that, we'll loop them in, and vice versa. We're very strong in hospital connections, hospital advocacy. So that organization is actually having somebody admitted because of an expertise that they've been involved with. They'll say, hey, Achiezer, can you please collaborate with us to make sure that their hospitalization gets taken care of? I never do this, but 15 extra seconds, if I may ask, 2 questions ago, you saw I was jumping out of my skin. Somebody asked how we get past that stigma or encourage people. And not that it's far be it for me to give advice to anybody here. I could learn plenty from this call. But one thing that we've seen fascinating as a small, you kept saying practical tip, not to lose focus. Very often people sit down, and I'll be very quick, by that first meeting, a crisis meeting, and they're trembling literally. They're a regular Joe and a regular couple in the community, and they never did this before. And very often what works, it may seem so simple, is I look them in the eye, it's me very often, it's a colleague, and I say, there's no way to sugarcoat this. This is a difficult moment for you. However, look, yesterday was Mega Millions in America. Everybody's dreaming about what they're going to do with that money. Things could change in a minute. And we tell them, right now, yes, you are on the receiving end. Let us help you. We'll get you through this.
Yeah.
Back on your feet, and you will come back one day as a volunteer. You'll be on that giving end. But right now, just put that aside, but believe in your head that you'll have that opportunity. And from the most hardened individuals, and from the mushy ones, and from the ones that are not prepared to hear it, I've seen it make a dramatic impact. I apologize for deviating.
Not at all. Not at all. I am going to continue this theme of one of our audience members has spoken about not doubling up in her question when resources are so scarce, not doubling up. And Saul has spoken to that. Mark, I think I might ask you to speak to that. You're an old hand at this. You're experienced. You've seen 1,000 appeals. You've seen 1 million requests. I mean, are we bumping against an issue here when resources are so scarce? And yet, on the other hand, I'm hearing from all the panelists how open they are to collaboration. There are a couple of questions we're having on this point, one from South Africa, one from Somerset. How do we fund this from a shrinking donor base? How do we maintain an enhanced sense of collaboration? Have a go at that, Mark.
I think as communal organisations, we have an absolute responsibility to develop our own strategies so that they align rather than overlap. I think there's a finite amount of resources out there, and really it was great. Listening with great interest to what Rabbi Bender said, that a multi-agency approach, which hasn't been something that the Jewish community has necessarily adopted in the past. It's been more of a feature of statutory intervention. But I think this is something that we absolutely have to work towards, and have at the same time have strategies that are have a symbiotic relationship with the local authorities and their plans. We might diverge a little bit in terms of where we want to go, but we do have to be traveling in the same direction. Less duplication, I think Saul picked up on that, is absolutely a key thing. And I think there's a number of things that we can we can absolutely do. And we should look to the Jewish rep councils, to the Jewish Leadership Council, to the Board of Deputies, to encourage us all and to be part of those conversations that bring us together, so that we're using our expertise in the most effective way that has the greatest impact for individuals. We shouldn't be territorial about how we help people. We should reflect and understand that the expertise lies. We're very lucky that the community has a wealth of expertise, and we should create that, bring that together as a jigsaw.
Bela, I will press you on it. You have Paperweight has a reputation for this, and I'm learning it from one of the questions, which actually came from Paperweight in Manchester. It seems to have a very strong track record of working in line with Rabbi Bender's suggestion, which is referrals, engagement with others and networks. Has that been your experience?
Absolutely. I think it's really important that each organisation needs to know its own strengths. Paperweight works across the Jewish spectrum, from the right to the left, anybody in between. Anybody who needs help knows that they can come knocking on our doors. And we are really grateful to work collaboratively with practically all the Jewish organisations, all the social care organisations in the UK. We ourselves, we started in London, we now have satellites in Manchester and Gateshead, and we're going further into other provincial cities in the UK. And our aim is really to provide a holistic solution, and we will do our best to pull together all available resources in order to be able to help one single client. And we do this, I think it's something that we do really well. In fact, when we receive a referral from another organisation, we're very insistent that they don't just refer that person and then sort of back out. We're very insistent that they stay on board, we work together. And as I say, holistically, we can really turn somebody's life around, and we've seen it time and again, and it's wonderful to see.
Thank you for all the questions from the audience, which are flooding in. Chaya and Moshe, I've got a very poignant one for you. I'm going to read it. It's very powerful. The question to you both is, do you think that we as a society, brackets, I would add we as a community or even individuals, have lost the skill of looking after each other, writes anonymous attendee. It used to be automatic, they write, but now people seem to care more about themselves. It's such a powerful question, and yet listening to you all, it seems that the provision of chesed, let alone the willingness of volunteers, has also never been stronger. But I wonder, Moshe, why don't you have a crack at that yourself from your experience?
Right. It kind of ties into the former question, where our experience in Israel is that the NGO world is a very competitive environment, where collaboration is something that we all wish to do, but often doesn't actually happen because of the competitive nature. And I think that we see that among foundations, there is good collaboration. But the NGOs, it's a very special individual who decides to launch an NGO. And these are usually people who think outside the box, they're mavericks. And we need more people like that. I don't think that we're seeing less of a dynamic energy in helping people. On the contrary, I think that we're bombarded with new requests from really across the spectrum of civil society. And we see a very rich environment where people don't have time to collaborate because they're so busy launching their new initiative. So I'm taking the contrarian view here, where collaboration is not something that's easy to do in Israel among NGOs. It is very effective with government agencies, meaning the interface between the third sector and government agencies in Israel is improving by the year. And there we see a tremendous emphasis on making sure that we're not duplicating efforts, and the better efforts in the charitable world are recognized by government agencies and then are adopted into the system, or tenders are issued for providing that type of service. I think it's like a very alive and energetic environment where collaboration is not the word.
Kaya, that question about have we lost that sense of altruism, or I guess what we would call the sense of chesed? Is it diminishing? Is it static? Is it increasing? What are you seeing in the community?
I think the amount of chesed and volunteering is unbelievable. It is something that we are so proud of. In the inter-sector collaboration that Moshe spoke about, we often have the opportunity to take people who are not members of the Jewish community and show them some of our chesed. They are bowled over. We have an unbelievable number of people who want to do good and are looking for a channel for that and do that via our organisations. I think, however, that life is harder nowadays. It's harder for people to volunteer. If you look at the structure of society, if you go back to my parents' generation, in a two-parent household, there was one parent, there was one adult working, and the other was available for volunteer work. In my generation, the 50-somethings, it's much more mixed. So some of us are working and some of us are available for volunteering. My children's generation, the budding adults, there's much more financial pressure. It's a much more fraught world, and I think people's ability to give is not as great as it used to be. Greater selfishness, I just see huge amounts of giving and wishing to give, and that the extent to which giving enriches people's lives. There is an awareness of that. I think what Rabbi Bender said so powerfully before about actually now you're at the receiving end, your time will come to give. When that time comes, the enrichment that offers to people is enormous. So no, it's for us to channel it, you know, to galvanize it and to channel that spirit of giving.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I know that we have a pretty hard stop at about 8:15 UK time, which is 10 minutes from now. So I'm going to take my chances, and I'm going to tell all of you that I'm throwing this open to you, but you have to be disciplined and no long speeches. It's a really important one. It's a really important one. It came from one of the audience members, and I think it goes back to the heart of your provision, getting to as many people as possible. It's a big build up here. And don't just give the twee, as we would say in the UK, the standard or the stock answer to this question. And it's a question around confidentiality. And a number of our audience have asked this question. So I am going to throw it open to you, but you're not allowed to say, oh, it's absolutely a critical part of everything we do. You got to give us more to go on, how you protect it, how you sanction in the event of breach. Why don't we give it a go? And in this instance, we will very briefly go round the group, but we got 9 minutes. So you got about a minute each on confidentiality. It is an absolutely central issue here. Saul, kick us off.
We don't, in our professional services, rely on volunteers in a big way for that reason. We have 1,000 employees, most of them professionals in what they do, and follow a code of conduct as prescribed by their profession. So A, I think it's having good professionals. B, I think it's having good systems and structures in place where the right people are involved with the right discussions. And then I think it goes more to your ethos and your culture within your organization. And if you see this as your calling and your passion to look out and care for others, you'll be highly sensitive to preserving their integrity in every step of the way.
Very, very good way to start, which is differentiating between our panelists. Those panelists who are running a large professional organization, Mark, Saul, and others, they build in these codes of conduct. Now, what about you, Bela, who have built a legendary group of volunteers, and I know many of them are listening now. How do you address this issue of confidentiality?
I'd say it's a tough issue in a way, but in a way it's not a tough issue, because I think it's something that we ingrain at the very start. When we take on volunteers, our caseworkers are all volunteers, and they undergo a huge amount of training before they are allowed to see any clients. And this point is drilled into them consistently throughout, that confidentiality is absolute. We recently changed over our organization to a new database, and it took us a long while to actually select the database that we currently have. And one of the reasons that we selected it was because it has restricted access, and only the caseworker or the very small team who is dealing with that client is able to see any information related to that client. Nobody else within the organization, within or without, is able to see that. So confidentiality is absolute.
That's really helpful. Moshe, also, by contrast, such an interesting panel, because you've got panelists who run, foundation-driven organizations, panelists with professional staff, but all of you have in common the fact that breaches of confidentiality bring everything you're doing down, like that, as Bela said. So Moshe, what's your approach, Moshe Shapiro?
Yes, so we definitely put an emphasis on absolute confidentiality. We are ISO certified for data privacy. We are attacked daily. I mean, all of Israel is attacked daily by Iranian hackers. You may know this. So our walls are strong, and we encrypt all identifying details of clients, so that none of our staff know who the person is. We provide them with a coded identifying tag. In measurement and evaluation projects, clients have the option to opt out, so that we will only include people in our M&E who have signed a waiver. So that provides people that ability. And we also have we're compliant to GDPR, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, which is the European standard of data security. So I think that the chances of someone's identity being identified and leaked is pretty slim. But the possibility is always there, and we have a protocol for breaches, which we already have planned out.
And Chaya, in a tight-knit community, what's your advice on confidentiality protection?
It's very challenging, and it's a constant work in progress. I agree that this is about culture, but it's also about process. And you have to tighten up your processes. So if somebody is applying for an affordable home and they are in desperate housing need, actually there are 20 people for every home that's available, more, but 20 people make it to the shortlist. As Moshe says, the only person who there are two people who actually know the identifying details of that family, and those are the two housing officers. Nobody else, and this goes through, you're talking about very high value and very limited resources that we are allocating here. And the process of allocation is a rigorous procedure, but none of the people who are involved in making those decisions know who the applicants are. And that is absolutely tight. A breach of confidentiality is gross misconduct. I've got to say that since I'm here, I've not seen a breach at that level. But it's about continuously emphasising the importance of this.
Mark, very briefly from you, your observations as someone who runs a big organisation.
I think that the simple thing for us is we always start with our values, and we base everything upon that, whether it's about our processes, our training, that respect and confidentiality is a kind of golden thread that runs through everything that we do, and we back that up in the same way that many of the other organisations do. You know, good GDPR, appropriate training, code of conduct. We do all of these things. I have the greatest respect for my colleagues who both live and work in the community that they serve. I think it's a constant challenge to maintain those boundaries between professional life and community. And I'm always left incredibly impressed with the commitment towards confidentiality and a willingness to support people and preserve their identity and confidentiality. So it's not easy, as Chaya said. It's not easy.
No. Rabbi Bender, just have the closing word on this one. And I really want you to, I hope, be willing to acknowledge that, as reflected in some of our audience's comments, it is an anxiety for many who want to reach out for this help, for this support. I think Mark was kind of alluding to the fact, as you all were, that it's right to acknowledge that anxiety, and at the same time, it's right to do everything possible in practical terms to address it. Will you say something about that?
Yep, I'll try to keep it with that time frame. So Mark actually ended off with something that I think I'll maybe not think where you think I'm going, but I'll tie it back with this entire webinar. I would say two things. Number one, certainly, like you said, it's not just a speech about, oh, we can't do it. At Achiezer, it's the ABCs of the entire organization. It's not a conversation. It's not so much that when I interview somebody, literally, like you picked the right topic for me, it's part of that initial interview. That is there's no tolerance, as it would say, lahar gayavar. There's no such thing as breaching confidentiality. If it gets breached in any sort of way, it's a policy I have in the organization. Maybe it sounds extreme. You can't work in the organization, period, end of story. No strike ones, no strike twos. Last but not least, to your point you just mentioned, I would say, and again, not to toot our own horn, God forbid, but I give this over by way of the same example each time, and it's a really short one. I tell my staff, there is nobody, whether they are calling for an ingrown toenail, or whether they need a heart surgeon, or whether they are homeless tomorrow because they're being evicted. Nobody wants to pick up the phone and call Achiezer. And all of you, I'm sure, have the same example. Think about it. Nobody's calling for help because they want to. How could they? And I think that I tell my staff, if you picture yourselves in those shoes, like we always ask, right, you will understand that the confidentiality aspect is everything. And my final point, by way of example, I would venture to say that when Achiezer first started, yeah, the calls came trickling in. I think there was a curiosity from the community. Am I supposed to call this guy Bender? It was just me, myself, right? And discuss my issues. But I would venture to say that we've seen a direct correlation by the fact that people in the community know that when you call for help, they are safe. Because yes, absolutely the anxiety is there. But I have seen over the last several years that more and more people call, and people who I previously thought would never pick up that phone, they're calling for one single reason. They are calling because they believe firmly that they are going to be taken care of, and that their secret is safe, and that they are going to be handled confidentially and with dignity. And it allows them that little bit of comfort to say, you know what, it's okay to call. I'm protected.
Yeah, thank you very, very much. Let me just say one thing before I wrap up, and I've mentioned often about the number of questions that are coming through. To one of our questioners, DW, she knows who she is. Benji, may I just mention to you, this is a question that's coming from a good chunk of the British audience, which is about finding ways to bring to greater awareness support for how families can be helped with mental health crises. And I know that we touched on it in one of our rounds, but maybe, you know, it's something that can be followed up with all of those that have participated on this panel, because as all the panelists have identified, it's one of the big themes which has come our way. So hopefully there can be a follow-up there, if you don't mind. Look, I have 8:17 London time, and I remember always being a fan of David Dimbleby, a very British specific reference there, who used to chair this iconic television program Question Time. And at a certain point, David Dimbleby would say, "I'm afraid that time has beaten us," which is always a phrase that I enjoyed. And in this instance, I'm able to use the phrase again, unfortunately, which is, "I'm afraid that time has beaten us." And in this instance, I think that the job of the moderator is to start on time, is to finish on time, and hopefully something interesting happens between the two. And in this instance, something wonderful happened between the two, of starting and finishing, and that's all thanks to you, the panelists. We set out at the start of this exercise, what we said was our exam question is ways to learn from each other, and I think we've very much done that. So first and foremost, let me sincerely thank all of the panelists from Jerusalem and from South Africa and from the United States, from Manchester and from London. Thanks, of course, Benji Conway, to you and all that you do for Paperweight, particularly, but more broadly in terms of what was addressed here, the challenge of Chesed. Once again, I wanted to thank the Raka family who inspired this event and much else too, and to you, Lionel Salama of Hope, helping us make this happen in a glitch-free way. One of the audience members, and this is very much in the spirit of one of the questions, which is, has that mutual help diminished? Has it stayed the same, or has it become enhanced? So I get a private message saying the concept of Chesed appears in the Torah at least 250 times. And in that sense, that's probably standing a week before Tisha B'Av as we do, a very appropriate way to end this. Everyone who has participated in this panel and in the questions have responded to that 250 times over call to look out for those who are less fortunate. And I am very, very grateful to you all for sharing your experience. So with that, I wish you all well. I wish you a Shavua Tov, and may we, after next Sunday, receive all of us an immediate consolation in a speedy and timely way. Thank you very much, and good afternoon and good evening.